Liam Parker's my name. I'm 42 years old, a staff sergeant in the Canadian Airborne Regiment. And I was on patrol on a dusty road outside of Kandahar when I got the divorce email. The steady, almost soothing hum of the engine underneath me was accompanied by the distant crackling of gunfire, which served as a constant reminder of my location. I was immediately struck by the subject line, "Let's be adults about this." Emily. She had given me a hug at the Edmonton airport 4 months prior, her arms slackly wrapped over my shoulders. Her lips grazing my cheek more out of habit than emotion. I ought to have anticipated that at that time. I ought to have known, however, I held on to the belief that we were simply under stress. That deployment was putting us to the test once more, as it always did, and that we would overcome it just like we had in the past. The message on my screen now was mercilessly brief. 3 phrases: the documentation had been filed by her. She had spent all of our shared funds. Nathan had been relocated into our home by her. That was it. No apology, no explanation, simply a fresh start provided as a PDF download. The desert breeze brushed over the back of my neck, making the hairs stand on edge as I read the email twice. Then, as if I were lowering the lid of a coffin, I gently closed the laptop and gazed into the darkness. I sat there for a long time listening to the night, the faint hiss of static on the radio, the shuffle of boots on sand, the muffled words of the people in the next vehicle. That night I had a shower in the communal rooms with a faint metal and rusty smell. As my mind wandered to a cold, empty place, my hands moved automatically: soap, rinse, towel. I dressed silently so as not to draw attention to myself from the men. We were all aware of the guidelines out here. Don't meddle with other people's problems. I typed a one-word response back at my bunk: I understand. I recall halting, my fingers lingering over the keyboard, and my palms trembling a little before I hit send. That was it. No begging for explanations, no accusations, no pleading, just a peaceful conclusion. My bunkmate, Sergeant Avery Chen, looked across from his cot, a damaged novel resting on his breast. "You good man?" he asked casually, not looking up. I slipped my laptop back into its case and muttered, "Yeah, just a few things from home." He nodded slightly. "All right, that was all you learn in the military: when to speak and when to let a man think for himself." Sleep seemed unattainable as I lay in my bunk that night, gazing at the cracked ceiling. My mind kept returning to the signs I had disregarded: Emily's late nights at the dentist's office, the unexpected fixation on going to the gym, despite the fact that she never appeared to perspire, the new passwords on her phone, the new outfits. Jealousy had never been my thing. I wasn't blind, though. I recalled the silent actions I had made prior to deployment, renting a tiny storage facility on the other side of town. I'm keeping my mother's silver, my grandfather's old watch, and vital papers like the marriage license, birth certificates, and house deed that are still in my name because of the Veterans Program. Additionally, I had transferred a portion of my paycheck to a different bank and opened a new account there. Just enough so I wouldn't fall flat on my face if the ground slipped out from under me, but not enough to draw attention. A part of me must have known. The following morning, as the air was heavy with the smell of burnt toast and overdone eggs, I joined the others for breakfast in the mess. With a silent motion that required no words, Chen slid a tray across the table to me. With my eyes down and my mind racing, I ate mechanically. I remembered the house, the one Emily and I had purchased in Edmonton in 2014, ours but modest. Good neighbors, a tiny yard and 3 bedrooms, Sunday mornings coffee in the kitchen. And Emily's habit of resting her head on my shoulder as soon as I entered the room after training came to mind. And I pondered just when all of that had vanished. I could feel the first edge of something cold and harsh setting in by the time I had scraped my plate clean. Not anger, not heartache. Something more lucid: pay attention. I would release her, however, I wouldn't go without anything. I was resting on the thin mattress that night with the scent of sweat and dust in the air, when I looked up at the ceiling and asked myself, how much has she already taken from me? I was sitting in the mess hall halfway through a bowl of boring oatmeal when my phone buzzed with a bank app notice. The screen lit up beside my tray. Withdrawal of $40,000 completed. I felt my gut tighten. I pushed the platter away and got up, ignoring Chen's interested look as I pushed past the faint hum of conversations. My heart was thumping so hard that I could feel it in my throat as I headed approach the Canadian Armed Forces phone station in the crisp morning air. I entered the international dial codes inside the booth and waited for the bank's line to click through. While I waited, my fingers pounded restlessly against the small metal shelf. When the speaker on the other end did answer, I spoke in a steady tone, precise and clipped, like a soldier who is accustomed to giving commands. "It's Liam Parker here. To find out more about my joint account I'm phoning? Yes, I just noticed a sizable outflow. Can you tell me the history for the last 2 months?" After a moment of hesitation, the woman on the telephone went over the transactions. The blood drained from my face as she rattled off quantities and dates. Small withdrawals at start 50, here 100 there, followed by bigger ones until the enormous transfer I just witnessed occurred. Ever since I got on the plane, Emily had been draining the account. I lingered in the booth for a while, after hanging up gazing at the wall, while the smell of dust and old perspiration permeated the room. My hand clenched around the shelf's edge for a brief moment. I could just hear her laughing in my ear as she told me that I was worrying too much. I took a deep breath. The base was bustling with activity as the sun rose higher by the time I went back outside. Chen was dragging a tire over the mud next to the auto depot when I saw him. When he saw me, he straightened. "Bad news?" he asked quietly. I paused. I usually kept my private affairs private, but Chen had previously saved me from a difficult situation in Kandahar. I had faith in him. With a terrible taste in my mouth, I said, "My wife emptied our accounts and moved into my house with her boyfriend." Chen narrowed his eyes and whistled softly. "Gosh, you got a plan?" "Not yet," I said. He touched my shoulder with a clap. "Figure it out, and when you need to talk, you know where to find me." That night, lying in my bunk, I couldn't sleep. My mind churned as the ceiling above blurred and sharpened in the dim light. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the home security system, something Emily had probably forgotten I could still access. The camera feed flickered to life and my breath caught. There was a man I didn't recognize, tall, wiry tattooed forearms, walking our dog through the backyard I had built with my own hands. He was wearing my Seahawk sweatshirt. My coffee mug was in his hand. Inside, Emily laughed in the kitchen, the same kitchen I'd spent 2 weeks remodeling on my last leave. Every cabinet and tile picked out together, or so I'd thought. My hands curled into fists, trembling slightly. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart, this was an invasion. I watched the footage, eyes locked on the screen, taking in every detail, the layout of the house. The comings and goings, the patterns. My mind clicked into a different gear. A gear I knew well, reconnaissance, assessment, planning. By the time the video looped back to the start, I had already made my decision. I drafted a message to Mark Reynolds, an old Army buddy who'd traded his uniform for a law degree. I kept it brief. "Need legal help, discreet and urgent, call me on secure line." As I hit send, the bank app buzzed again. Another withdrawal, this time $8,500. I drew in a slow breath, fingers pressed to my temples, then let it out carefully. No more waiting. No more hoping Emily would come to her senses. She'd made her choice. This wasn't grief anymore. This was war. And as I closed the laptop, the thought came sharp and clear, cutting through the haze. This isn't just a divorce. This is a takeover. In the dimly lit phone room at the Canadian Armed Forces base, I sat alone, the hard plastic receiver pressed to my ear. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead mixed with the muffled sounds of soldiers passing in the hallway. My voice was low, careful. "Mark, it's Liam. I need your help." On the other end, Mark Reynolds, a man I trusted with my life back when we were clearing roots in Helmand, answered without hesitation. I figured you'd call. His voice was calm, precise, the same tone he'd used when laying charges under enemy fire. "Tell me everything." I laid it out, the email, the drained accounts, the camera footage, the man wearing my clothes walking my dog, laughing with my wife in the kitchen I'd sweated over during my last leave. The words came out clipped, controlled, but Mark caught the undercurrent. "You remember what we used to say," he murmured, "never walk into an ambush without a map." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, eyes fixed on the gray wall in front of me. "I'm ready to make a map." Mark wasted no time. "First, freeze as much as you can. Do you still have access to the house deed?" "Yes, it's under my name." "Good, contact the bank, report any suspicious transactions, and Liam—" He hesitated for the first time. "Emily's boyfriend. Do you know who he is?" "Name's Nathan Cooper." I heard keys tapping on the other end. "Liam, this guy's got a record. 2 DUIs, a fraud charge from 3 years ago. He's not just some rebound, he's a parasite." I closed my eyes, fingers tightening around the receiver. Mark's voice softened. "You're not just fighting for your pride, You're fighting to keep what's yours. When the call ended, I stayed seated for a moment, the empty silence of the phone room pressing in around me. Slowly, I pulled out my laptop and logged into the security feed again. Nathan was in the living room now, feet up on the coffee table I'd built myself the summer before. Emily passed him a drink, brushing his shoulder as she walked by my dog. Buster, a German Shepherd mix, lay at Nathan's feet. A strange calm settled over me. Not the numbness of the first shock, not the white-hot anger that had flickered up earlier, but something colder, sharper. My mind was already cataloging times, faces, movements, evidence. That night, I drafted an email to the bank. I attached copies of the house deed, the marriage certificate, the loan paperwork, all still in my name. I flagged the suspicious withdrawals, requesting a freeze on the remaining funds. I copied Mark on everything. The next morning, I visited the base legal office and requested a secure line to the Edmonton Police non-emergency line. I gave them a quiet heads up, just enough to plant the seed that something was coming. By the time I hung up, Mark had already set up a consultation with a property lawyer back in Canada. Chen found me later in the mess hall, sliding a tray across the table without a word. He sat down, eyes flicking over my face. "You look different," he said finally. "I have a plan," I murmured. He nodded once good. That evening, just before lights out, Mark called again. "Liam," he said, "we found something." Papers rustled. "There's a refinance application on your house, $300,000. Your signature's on it, but it's not your signature." For a heartbeat, I couldn't speak. My mouth went dry. "Emily listed Nathan as a co-applicant," Mark continued, voice grim. "They're pulling out equity from under you." I stood slowly, heart hammering in my chest, the room tilting just slightly, my fists clenched at my sides. "I've got the documents," Mark said. "We can stop this, but you need to stay sharp." As I stared at the wall, my reflection faint in the dusty glass, something inside me hardened. The grief, the disbelief, even the rage, they were gone, now burned away like morning mist. All that remained was resolve. I lifted the receiver again, called Mark back, and when he answered, my voice was low, steady and sharp as a blade. "They have no idea who they're playing with." From the window of my motel room in Edmonton, I watched the glow of the security camera feed on my laptop screen. Nathan Cooper and Dylan White, the real estate agent, were in my living room laughing over beers like they owned the place. It was surreal watching strangers lounge in the home I'd worked for, the house where Emily and I had once dreamed of raising a family. But the bitterness that had gnawed at me in the early days was gone. In its place was something colder, sharper. I wasn't here for heartbreak. I was here for a reckoning. Mark's words echoed in my ear from the call we'd had just an hour ago. "Let them dig their own graves. We just hold the shovel." On the screen, Nathan leaned back on my couch, legs spread wide, his boots on the coffee table. Dylan was pointing at the walls, gesturing animatedly as Emily handed them papers. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to stay still. Every moment they spent planning their little heist was another knot tightening in the noose around their necks. I took a breath, picked up my phone, and called Mark. "They're in," I said softly. Mark's voice was a steady anchor on the other end. "Good, forward the live feed to the RCMP's Financial Crimes Unit. I've already given them a heads up." By the time I hung up, the bank had called back. The loan officer's voice had trembled as he confirmed the forged refinance application. When I told him I was filing a police report, he went pale even over the phone. "We'll cooperate fully," he assured me. The day passed in a haze of quiet preparation. I copied every document, backed up every video, sent packets to Mark, the police, and the bank. I even walked down to the local branch and handed the loan officer my military ID, the house deed, and a signed affidavit of forgery. His face drained of color as he skimmed the paperwork. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the motel lights flickered on, I returned to the laptop. Nathan and Dylan were still at it, measuring walls, snapping photos, arguing over price points. Emily hovered in the background, arms crossed, her face tight. I watched them like a hunter and a blind patient, invisible. My phone buzzed. "Emily, we need to talk. Please meet me tomorrow." I stared at the screen, a faint smile tugging at the corner of my mouth, so the panic was setting in. Outside the motel's neon sign buzzed softly. Somewhere down the hall, a couple was arguing in low voices. I tuned it all out, focusing instead on the image of Nathan and Dylan standing in what used to be my living room, planning the next phase of their scam. I called Mark once more. "We're ready." His voice was calm. "The RCMP's moving tonight. Stay sharp." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Years of military training had taught me how to wait, how to measure time in breaths and heartbeats. I could do this, I would do this. An hour later, the camera feed flickered as headlights swept across the driveway. Nathan glanced up from the couch, frowning. Dylan looked toward the window. I leaned forward, heart hammering. A knock at the door, the sound of voices, the unmistakable flash of red and blue lights across the screen. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Emily. Please, Liam, we need to talk. Meet me at the park tomorrow. I closed the laptop slowly, the images of confusion and dawning horror still fresh in my mind. This wasn't just a divorce, this was a takedown. I sat frozen on the edge of the motel bed, watching the laptop screen as the red and blue lights pulsed across my front lawn. The RCMP cruisers boxed in the driveway, their doors flung open, officers moving with crisp precision. Inside, the living room turned into chaos. Nathan shot to his feet, knocking over a lamp, his face paling as he peeked through the blinds. Dylan scrambled for the back door, papers spilling from his hands, while Emily clutched her phone to her ear, pacing in frantic circles. I barely breathed. Years of combat had taught me to keep calm under fire, but this was different. This was personal. My phone rang, and for a second I just stared at it. Then I picked up. Mark's voice was tight but triumphant. They're in custody. Both Nathan and Dylan, RCMP, seized all documents and electronics. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle in. For the first time in months, my shoulders sagged, the weight easing just slightly. There's one more thing, Mark added. Emily just showed up at the scene. She's distressed. Of course she was. On the laptop screen, I saw her outside arms wrapped tightly around herself, hair disheveled, watching as the officers carried boxes of files and electronics out the front door. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, her whole world crumbling before her eyes. My phone buzzed with another message from Emily. Why didn't you tell me, please, Liam? I don't understand what's happening. For a moment, I felt an old flicker of something, pity maybe, but it burned out quickly, replaced by a cold clarity. She had made her choices, she had built her house of cards, and now it was falling. As I watched the screen, Nathan and Dylan were led out in handcuffs, heads down, mouths set in grim lines. Emily took a step toward the officers, but one held out a hand, gently stopping her. She flinched, shrinking back. Mark's voice pulled me from the screen. The RCMP needs your formal statement tomorrow. And Liam, Emily's cooperation might determine whether she faces charges. I leaned back against the headboard, the springs creaking under my weight. My gaze drifted to the crack in the ceiling, the faded motel wallpaper, the cheap lamp humming faintly by the bed. Another message buzzed onto my phone. Please call me. I didn't. Instead, I reached down and ran a hand through my hair, letting the adrenaline ebb slowly from my system. My mind drifted to Chen back at the base, to Buster, waiting in a kennel somewhere, to the quiet field outside Edmonton, where my house now stood empty. I had come here to stop a financial ambush. What I uncovered was a betrayal deeper and uglier than I'd expected, and yet I felt no triumph. Just stillness. As the night wore on, the RCMP wrapped the scene. The camera feed went dark as they disconnected, the home network evidence bag in hand. For the first time in weeks, I closed the laptop without hesitation. I stared at my phone as it buzzed once more. We need to talk in person. Meet me at Riverfront Park tomorrow. Mark called again early the next morning as sunlight poured through the thin motel curtains. I strongly recommend you don't meet her, he warned. Nothing good will come of it right now. I know, I said quietly, but I want to know what she's doing while she thinks I'm meeting her. Mark chuckled softly. Still the soldier, huh? Always, I murmured. At 9:30 a.m., parked down the street from my house, I watched as Emily pulled out of the driveway, headed toward Riverfront Park. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up, a real estate agent's logo emblazoned on the door. Dylan was gone, but Nathan came out to greet the man. Through my laptop screen, I watched them shake hands, laugh, step inside. Mark's voice sounded in my ear, equal parts impressed and amused. You didn't mention you installed interior cameras. Never came up, I said, lips twitching into a faint smile. On the screen, Nathan and the agent moved from room to room, the agent snapping photos. Nathan pointing at the features of the house. The volume crackled faintly. Should list by the end of the week, the agent was saying. I've got a buyer interested already, cash offer as usual. Nathan smirked. What about the husband? The agent waved a hand. Military guys are all the same. They make noise. But they've got deployments, responsibilities. He'll take a settlement to make it go away. I watched the calm inside me turning sharp again. Mark's voice came through my earpiece as he recorded the feed from his end. Every word. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of my cabin in British Columbia, a steaming mug of coffee in my hand, Scout leaning heavily against my leg. The sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long golden shadows across the treetops. The air smelled like pine and earth and the faintest trace of wood smoke. Scout, my German shepherd, a rescue from a shelter near Edmonton, thumped his tail once against the deck, his ears twitching toward the sound of a distant owl. I ran my thumb over the corner of a letter pinned to the refrigerator inside, its edges worn soft from handling. "You don't know me," it read, "but you saved our home. My husband's in the Navy and we were caught in Jeremy and Dylan's scam. The FBI told us you came forward. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to walk away." I read that letter more times than I could count, some days when the silence of this place pressed in a little too close. I pulled it down, smoothed the paper between my fingers, and reminded myself it had mattered. Mark had called 2 weeks after the trials ended. Nathan Cooper, 8 years for fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Dylan White, 12. Emily avoided charges, but she signed over everything. Full restitution, no claim to your military pension, and a formal confession on the forgery. On the day the final papers came through, I sat alone on the motel bed, looking at the divorce decree. No fault, clean break. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding and set it down next to my phone. Emily had messaged once after that I never meant for things to end this way. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. I sold the house, couldn't stand to live there anymore. Too many memories soaked into the drywall, too many ghosts in the corners. With the money I bought this cabin, 2 bedrooms, 10 acres of creek running out back, no neighbors for miles. It was the kind of place that didn't ask anything from you except patience. I took early retirement. 20 years of service was enough. The Army had given me everything: purpose, brotherhood, and a home when nothing else did. But now it was time to build something that belonged only to me. These days I work with my hands again, small carpentry jobs for the locals, fixing fences, building shelves, sanding down old rocking chairs until they gleamed like new. My pension covered the bills. The work kept me grounded. Sometimes on still mornings I'd catch myself thinking of Emily, not with anger, not even with regret, but with the kind of distant curiosity you reserve for a stranger you once loved. Mark told me she'd moved back to Saskatchewan, working at a small-town dental clinic, starting over, I guess. So had I. That night, as the last light bled from the sky, I heard the faint buzz of my phone on the windowsill. I stepped inside, Scout padding after me, and glanced at the screen. A message from Mark. "The RCMP wants you to speak at a veterans event. They think your story could help others." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. Scout looked up at me, head tilted, his dark eyes shining in the low light. "We did good, eh, boy?" I murmured, crouching to scratch behind his ears. His tail wagged, once thumping against the floor. I looked around the cabin, the warm light spilling over the wood floors, the faint smell of cedar. The quiet peace I'd carved out of chaos and felt for the first time in a long while, something like home. As I stood, the last rays of the sun caught on the edge of the thank you letter. I ran my fingers over the words one more time, then pinned it carefully back to the fridge. Outside, the night settled over the trees, cool and sure. And for the first time since Emily's email arrived in a dusty corner of Kandahar, I felt ready to let the past go. There was a time I thought I'd lost everything: my marriage, my home, my sense of trust. Facing betrayal while deployed overseas felt like the ultimate blow. But standing my ground and seeing justice served reminded me that resilience matters. My story is just one among countless others. Too many people quietly endure betrayal and financial devastation without knowing they have the power to fight back. The biggest lesson I took away is this: patience and strategy win where anger fails. When you stay calm, gather your facts, and plan your next move, you regain control over chaos. Thank you for following my journey. It means more than you know. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to leave a 1 in the comments to hear more stories like this. And if you have your own story of overcoming betrayal or injustice, feel free to share it. Together, we remind each other that even after loss, it's possible to rebuild something stronger.